So then I connected the point together, which makes the side seam. So this is where the construction stops. So I will explain how I got my hem allowance. And now to decide that from the chest level on this point, I came down by 3 inches, which is here. So from the chest level, I measured 3 inches downward. So your side dart can fall in between 2 and 3 inches points on the side seam. So I made my 3 inches. So which is here. So from the 3 inches point, I measured my dart intake. So my dart intake was 1 inch, and I got the midpoint of 1/2 inch. So which means from this point to the first dart leg is 3 inches. So then from here to here is 1/2 inch. From here to here is 1/2 inch. Okay. Then I connected the midline to the bust span measurement. The bust span measurement is the distance between the 2 nipples. Okay, so mine is 7.5 inches. The measurement I'm working with is 7.5 inches, and half of that is 3.75. So from the center front line, I measure 3.75 on the bust level, and I have it here. Then I connected the bust span points to the mid that I have here, which is 1/2 inch point. So after drawing out this line like so, I have it like so. Then I measured out my dart length. The standard measurement for the side dart is 5 inches. Okay, purposely because the dart must not get to the bust point. We have to move the dart away from the bust point. So if I take 1 inch away from the bust point, let's assume I want to move this away by 1 inch. So what I will be having for my dart length will be more than 5 inches, but I don't want the dart length to be too long, so the standard measurement is 5 inches. So if you want it shorter, you can reduce this to 4 inches. So 5 inches is ideal for the side dart. So from the 5 inches point, which is here, then I connected the remaining 2 points like so. So this is the middle dart. Then the 1/2 inch I have here, I connected this to the 5 inches point, and this side also to the 5 inches point. So that was how I arrived at my darts. Now, because I've picked a dart of 1 inch by the side, after constructing this shirt, this part will be shorter. Any part where that is being picked on a bodice, the allowance has to be added back. You can see by the time I pick this dart, I will have this side shorter than this side. So in order not to have that, I will have to return my dart allowance to the lower part of my shirt. So now I have to add my 1 inch back to the length of my shirt, and it's going to be by this side. So I did not add any dart to the center front. The dart was picked on the side, so the dart allowance has to be added back to the side as well. This is where my shirt length stopped initially, but I added extra piece of paper to make this longer. So this is the real shirt length I was working with earlier. Okay, so the other part of the paper I have below this point, I just added the piece of paper, okay, because I wanted to add my dart allowance. So from this point, which is the real shirt length measurement, I measured 1 inch downward. So this is my dart allowance. If your dart intake is more than 1 inch, so definitely you will add more than 1 inch. If your dart intake is 2 inches, then you will add extra 2 inches to the length of your shirt by the side. So this is the 1 inch point. Then I connected the 1 inch point to the real shirt length measurement I was working with before. So I don't need to add 1 inch to the center front side, purposely because I did not pick the dart to the center front. If you make this on a straight line, then your center front will be longer than your side seam. So with this, the hemline is not going to be on a straight line. So this is the 1 inch point, which is the dart allowance. Then I connected this point to the real chest length on the center front, so which is this. You can see what I have. Then I connected this slantly, is no more on a straight line. So instead of having this as my shirt length, so this is my new shirt length. So I will label this part as my new shirt length with a different color of marker. Now I have this labeled as my new shirt length. So this is my new shirt length. Then I added my hem allowance. So this has to be done before adding your hem allowance in order not to get you confused. So with this, my hemline is no more on a straight line. So when I was adding my hem allowance, I added 1 inch as my hem allowance, purposely because this is a shirt. It does not require as much of hem allowance. So 1 inch is enough as hem allowance. So I follow the shape I have on my hemline. So on this part, I measure 1 inch downwards, and on this part as well, I measured 1 inch downward. Then I connected the 2 points together. Then I come to the placket allowance line, which is the edges of my pattern paper. Then I measured 1 inch downward as well, and I connected from the center front to the placket points, like so. So from here to here, then from here to here, and I extended the center front line also downward to meet the hem allowance line. Then on the side seam as well, I extended this downward to the hem allowance line. So guys, now I'm going to proceed to the shaping of the lower part. Okay, so if you don't want your lower part to be shaped, you can as well leave it on a straight line like so. But if you want to have a kind of curvy effect at the lower part, then you can go ahead and shape the lower part. So in shaping the lower part, I will be subtracting 2 inches away from the side seam. So from the hem allowance point, which is the end of my shirt pattern, I will measure 2 inches upward, and I have the point here. Okay, so from the 2 inches point, then I will connect to the other side, which is the center front side of my pattern, with a curve ruler. Then I will position my curve ruler like so. Then you can adjust your ruler based on how much you want the curve to be. So which means I have this now for the shape of my shirt. Now you can see the shape I have for this shaping. Okay, so this is one. If you don't want yours to be as curvy as this, you can as well get the midpoint of your hemline. So from the center front line to the side seam, so I have 12 inches, so you can get the midpoint. Then the connection is going to be from the side seam to the midpoint. So for this, I will highlight this with my red marker. So this is what you will have for the other shape. So it all depends on you. You can create any shape you want for the lower part of your shirt. So you can as well adjust your ruler to the 3/4 point of your hemline, like so. So you can see this as well. I will highlight this with my black marker. So you can choose any design of your choice for the lower part of your hemline. So now that I have this done, the next step is to add my seam allowances. In adding my seam allowances, I will be adding 1/2 inch of seam allowance around the neckline, 1/2 inch of seam allowance on the shoulder line. Don't forget, this is a new shoulder line, this is the previous shoulder line. Okay, so I will be taking this up by 1/2 inch. so which is going to be used in joining the front and the back panels together. Half of an inch of seam allowance is also needed on the armhole area for attaching the sleeve, and if yours is a sleeveless, then you will be using the half of an inch in finishing the armhole area. Also, if your shirt is going to be a sleeveless, don't forget to reduce your shoulder line. So half of an inch of seam allowance is needed on the armhole area, then 1 inch of seam allowance by the side, and I don't need to add any other seam allowance on the hemline because I have my hem allowance added already. And for the placket allowance, there is no extra seam allowance needed. The 5 inches cover for the finishing and every other part. So after adding my seam allowance, then I can proceed in cutting out my pattern. Okay guys, now I have my seam allowances added all around my pattern, so I can proceed in cutting out my front shirt pattern. In cutting out the front panel, I will not cut on the real shoulder line for the front panel, which is this. Don't forget, this is a real shoulder line. This is the previous one before I subtracted 1 inch from the shoulder line. Okay, then I took this up by half of an inch. So now I'm supposed to cut on this line. I'm supposed to cut on the shaded line. So this is the part I'm supposed to cut out, but because I will be using this front panel as a template to draft the back panel, so I will not be cutting on this yet. So I will cut out this first. So after drafting the back panel, then I will trim off this part. So now I'm cutting on the shoulder line I crossed out earlier. So after drafting the back panel, then I will trim off this part. So this is the real shoulder line for the front panel. Now before cutting out the neckline, I will be folding in my placket allowance. Now to the hemline, I will be cutting out the middle shape. Okay guys, now it's time to draft the back panel. So I have the front panel cut out, as you can see, and I've laid a fresh pattern paper which I will be using in drafting the back panel. And as I said earlier, when I was cutting the front panel, I told you I will be using the front panel as a template to draft the back panel. Okay, so now the first step is to fold in the placket allowance I have on my front panel. In this case, placket allowance is not needed on the back panel. The center back is going to be on fold. So the edges of my pattern paper is going to be my center back. Then I will label this as my center back. Then from the edges of my pattern paper at the top, I measured 2 inches downward, which is here. So this straight line is going to be my starting point line for the back panel. So I will label this as my starting point. Here I have it. This is the starting point for the back panel. So now I will be placing the shoulder line of the front panel on the starting point line I drew out, and I will make the center front line to align with the center back edges. Then I will hold the two together with my tapes. Okay guys, now I have my front panel taped together with my fresh pattern paper. You can see the edges of my neckline, which is the HPS, is touching the starting point line I drew out on my fresh pattern paper, and the center front also aligned together with the center front. So the next step is to transfer all my lines and the shape I have on the shoulder line, the armhole, the side seam to the fresh pattern paper. So on the hemline, I'm going to stop on the shirt length, so I will not extend this downward to the hem allowance line, purposely because I've made some adjustments on the hemline when I was plotting my side darts. So this is going to stop on the exact shirt length I measured out initially. guys, now I have all my lines traced out on the fresh pattern paper, so I can separate my front panel from the back panel, after which I will trace out my lines properly on the fresh pattern paper and label them appropriately.